Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on today's Thursday edition of the show, a prediction show. Oregon at Wisconsin, 4:30 Pacific time, 6:30 Central Time. Kick Camp Randall, NBC. The third game on the NBC networks for this season. Second one of Saturday night prime time. It's going to be a big game. There's a lot on the line for both teams. Wisconsin's still fighting for bowl eligibility and improve their bowl game status, show that they can hang with the big boys, which they've, in their previous matchups, they haven't been able to do. And for Oregon, it's continued to continue to have the inside track for the Big Ten championship, the number one seed in the college football playoff rankings, which came out earlier this week, still number one. And honestly, guys, in my opinion, kind of show like last week was more of a fluke and not necessarily a trend of the sloppy, poor execution play. Show up and kind of dominate an opponent on the road and kind of flex your muscle here a little bit.
Yeah, I think if the margin is what it was last week, that's fine. I think
Absolutely.
3 scores is plenty. The issue last week wasn't the margin; it was that there was some kind of sloppy play mixed in there, and I don't know if that's going to be a trend. And I guess maybe that's something we're looking towards is. Are they going to kind of waffle here a little bit in November? Haven't had a bye week, been playing a long time. Maryland had a bye week before Oregon. Wisconsin has a bye week before Oregon. Those teams kind of have that kind of an advantage. Are we going to kind of see some sloppy play again? I expect it to be cleaner. I think we've seen this team play, when there have been issues, they've corrected it kind of in short order. I expect the penalty stuff to be, I'm not going to say it's going to be a perfect game, but I don't expect legit penalties again. But yeah, well, let's go out there and see if they can play a cleaner game. I think we all agree that Oregon is clearly the better team, but let's see what they're able to do in terms of actually executing and proving that on the field.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt that they'll be able to clean up their penalties. A lot of them last week against Maryland were, defensive pass interference, defensive holding in the secondary. I don't anticipate Wisconsin to throw the ball nearly as often as Maryland did and put them into trouble situations like the Terrapins did. This is going to be more of like what you think of like in a physical Big Ten game. A lot of rushing attempts. Wisconsin's quarterback Braden Locke isn't the best at throwing. He's not going to be one of the world-class quarterbacks that we saw last season, so they're going to rely a lot on their run game. And I think Oregon's going to run the ball as well, most because that could be a deficiency in Wisconsin's defense this week. Like Erik said, they're coming off of a bye. I'm not sure how much that's going to matter in the grand scheme of things, but that certainly is an advantage for Wisconsin going into this game as well as home field advantage. So there's some things stacked against Oregon going into this week, but at the end of the day, they have the far superior roster, the 10-0 start, the confidence to go in there. And before Wisconsin went on this bye week, they got slapped around by Penn State and Iowa back-to-back weeks. So they're trying to look for revenge. They'll probably come out hot and swinging. But like Oregon has done this year on the road, it's been important for them to jump out to, 14-0 start, 17-0 start, quiet the crowd. And then this turns into just a battle on the gridiron. There's no crowd noise or anything like that. It's just, player versus player. And I'll take Oregon's players all day.
I posted it in Jared's storyline thing for me. Like I would not be concerned at all if Oregon plays a highly clean game of football and they win by 7. I would be more concerned if they win by 15 or 16 points, barely cover the spread, which is 14 right now. But it's like pulling teeth and they make a bunch of mistakes and they make a bunch of penalties. And you look at this saying like, yeah, they kind of like we did with Maryland. Like, yeah, they won by 21, but they could have won by 35 or 42 if they played well, and if they play poorly against a better opponent, maybe it catches up to them. Like, I'll be more concerned about that if they show up again for a second straight week than a close game, because this game might be close. Who knows? Like, they have talent, and if their secondary is dynamic. Hallman, you just don't throw to his side of the football field, as Dan Lanning put it. But then he also said, "We'll try because you have to." Their safeties are good. They've got some talent on this side of the football, and that could be maybe a matchup to watch of just kind of like how does Oregon's offense operate a second week without Tez Johnson? Because you guys were at practice. I don't think Dan Lanning gave really any true insight, but I don't think we're going to see Harper, and we shouldn't see Tez this weekend. And how does Oregon operate a second week without those guys, and where does the improvements come without those guys?
Yeah, that's one of the big ones for me. That was what I wrote about in the storylines column that you mentioned a second ago, which was this Oregon pass offense has been awesome this year, right? And it's been inconsistent at times. There were some ups and downs early, but for the most part, you go up there and you look, and Dylan throws a couple of touchdown passes, about 300 yards, and maybe has a turnover here and there, but for the most part, it looks really good. And statistically, it's one of the best in the conference, one of the best in the country. That was not quite what we saw last week against Maryland. There were, I think, a season high in drop passes in that game. There was a lack of explosive passing game down the field. You kind of felt the absence of Tez, as maybe we kind of overlooked going into that game thinking, wow, look at Trayshawn just did there. Well, we know what Evan can do. Justice is emerging. Ferg's back. They've got Sadiq. They have all these players, but none of them are Tez Johnson. So I will be very curious to see this week what this pass offense looks like, because this is statistically one of the best secondaries that Oregon will face all season. So are they able to go out there and produce the way that they've been? Or is this a game where you're a lot more reliant on the run game? And I think if that's the outcome, that doesn't necessarily terrify me, but it does open the door for this being maybe a little lower scoring, maybe a little closer, and maybe a game that you are kind of concerned about going into the fourth quarter. So I do think it's like the speed of Oregon at receiver is, and we say this so often, and even without Tez, it feels like such an advantage. And this week in particular, I mean, I talked about it a little bit with Jared in our Wednesday show. I have a ton of respect for what, Hunter Wohler and Preston Zachman are at safety, but I think Oregon has a pretty decided speed advantage. And I'll be very curious to see how Will Stein and company attacks those guys, because I do think there's opportunity to win over the top. I do think there's opportunity to win in space and create some big plays. It's just a matter of, are they able to execute that way? So that's going to be, I think, to me, a pretty central part of this for Oregon's offense is what is this pass game? Because we know what it looks like when it's at its best. Last week was not that. What's the step taken this week, and how are the matchups? Because this is a tough secondary they're facing.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add is, like, Gabriel needs to find his new safety valve, and that was Tez Johnson for the all the season beforehand, where if he got into trouble, he'd just go right to Tez Johnson and for 4 or 5 yard game, and then he would take it and turn it into 6 or 7 or break a couple tackles and go for 30. They didn't have that last week, and that's why Terrence Ferguson got force-fed 12 targets last week. And while Ferguson is a good player, had some troubles with drops last week, I don't really anticipate that to continue, although it's kind of been a trend since the spring game. I wouldn't, they need to find somebody else to be there in those situations, because Ferg, while he can catch it for those 4 or 5 yards, that's great if you have 4 or 5 yards left on third down, but he's not going to explode and break free for another 15 to 20 as often as Tez Johnson will. So maybe it's Justice Lowe. Maybe it's moving Evan Stewart into the slot, which I don't really like, but that is what it is. Maybe it's Trayshawn Holden into the slot where he's played beforehand. Maybe it's Gary Bryant Jr. actually has a role this week on the offense rather than just playing 2 snaps and a couple punt returns. It just needs to be an option for Gabriel when he escapes the pocket, because teams, I'm assuming Wisconsin is going to stick to their 2 high safety look and try to take away the deep shots to Evan Stewart or Trayshawn Holden. So they're going to need to control the middle of the field and the underneath routes, which has been Tez Johnson's forte for as long as he's played college football, as long as he's been in Oregon. They're just going to need to find somebody else. And it could be Justice Lowe, it could be any of the guys I just previously mentioned. But it needs to be there. And when you can suck the defense down closer to the box in terms of the safeties coming down, then that frees up your deep shots. And when you can run the ball effectively, which didn't really happen last week against Maryland, it happened in a couple spots, but if they can run the ball against the second worst Big Ten defense against the rush this year, then again, that pulls guys closer to the line of scrimmage, sets up the deep shots for those explosive plays. But we'll see. I just think Gabriel needs to find a different safety valve maybe than Terrence Ferguson, or at least give Ferguson a shot on some of these.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Jared, I think he is the safety valve in Ferguson. It's just, and you just said at the very end, can they be better maximize his opportunities than they have previously. On the other side of the football, I was kind of shocked to see this. And I guess in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't be, knowing the background and the team makeup of Wisconsin, but just knowing how often Michigan runs the football this season because of their lack of QB play. Statistically, Wisconsin runs it more than Michigan does. And I think the game plan defensively is basically just going to be the same thing. And I guess there, from a storyline standpoint, like Jared, you touched on it. I think it's your storyline hits on home run for what Oregon defensively just needs to do, because if they do that, they win.
Yeah, that's my number one storyline, is just how can Wisconsin move the ball against Oregon's defense? Like you said, Matt, Wisconsin runs the ball a lot. That's just kind of what their offense has to do now that, after Tyler Van Dyke, the transfer quarterback from Miami, went down game 3 against Alabama and was out for the year, and Braden Locke had to take over. They run the ball 37.7 attempts per game. This is like the inverse of what Maryland did last week in almost 40 pass attempts. This is just what they do, and they run it pretty effectively. 4.6 yards per carry, 173 yards per game. It's one of the better rushing offenses in the Big Ten. And when they play against bad teams, Erik and I went over this on Wednesday's podcast. They're I think 700 of their 1,500 total rushing yards came in a 3-game span against Rutgers, Purdue, and Northwestern, where they ran the ball for an absurd 228, 309, and 199 in those 3 games. Those are bad teams. Oregon is well aware of how good Purdue is. Rutgers, not a great team, and then Northwestern, not a great team. So if Oregon's defense can stop Wisconsin on first and second down when they want to run and force them into third and long, that's advantage Oregon. I think Braden Locke can be a better quarterback. Right now, he's completing like 58% of his passes. He has 8 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He is not a star caliber quarterback, and I'm sure the Wisconsin Badger fans wish that Tyler Van Dyke were healthy, because this would be a much different team if he were. But that's not the case right now, and I think Oregon can really take advantage of this matchup if they force him into third and longs, because I don't think Locke has the arm strength or the talent to really get through these situations, and I'm not sure that they have the talent on the outside to break free against Oregon's secondary.
I think for Wisconsin to really be competitive, Toby Walker's going to have to pop a couple of long runs or something. They're going to have to find some way to get explosive, and I don't see it through the air based upon Jared and I ran through on Wednesday's show. Just like, this is not a pass offense that's really had any vertical pass success since Van Dyke went down. I mean, they've had a little bit, but very, very little. And frankly, when Locke has thrown deep, that's where he's also gotten into some turnover problems. So I don't necessarily think that scenario that they'll have a ton of success, but certainly they have a running back who's explosive. Now, he's not the trend of Wisconsin running backs. Like Oregon has got a bit of a history playing Wisconsin. It seems like every time they play them, it's like these 230-pound guys that it's just like it takes 5 people to get them to the ground. Walker is explosive. I think he's 5'9", 218 on the roster. So that's a well-built kid, but he is not this hulking, powerful guy who's going to drag tacklers on his back down the field, which is what it feels like you see when you play Wisconsin. So this is a guy, though, who's capable of popping a couple, and I think that's where you've got to be able to maintain, gap integrity, make sure you've got your linebackers in the right position, the defensive line, who I have a ton of confidence in this matchup, even though Wisconsin's offensive line is really good. I don't doubt Oregon's defensive line can make it difficult, but if they allow a couple of long runs here, that's where maybe this game gets interesting, because I don't see Wisconsin offensively being able to consistently move it reliably through the air, and I don't see them having a whole lot of vertical pass success. So it's going to have to come down to this run game, and if Oregon can stop them from having any of these 30 or 40-yard runs, I think it becomes really difficult to see Wisconsin hanging around or even taking a lead at some point in the second half.
This feels like a game where Oregon's team speed is going to be very evident and very impactful in terms of covering up mistakes, or on like the defensive side of the football, like playing man-to-man coverage or playing zone coverage with only a couple guys in the secondary and just loading the box to stop Walker. But I think for me, that's going to be like one of the main takeaways I'm gonna walk away from Camp Randall Stadium of is they are impressed of it, but I think a lot of people are also just going to go like, wow, Oregon is just, again, like how fast they are compared to everybody else on the field when they play Wisconsin. Yeah, it's going to be a game. It's going to be an exciting game. I think the crowd atmosphere for the first quarter is going to be pretty interesting and impactful potentially. And I think Jared said it, like, you got to start out hot with a couple, put together a couple drives to eliminate the crowd, because you give hope. And this is a stadium, that could get pretty raucous, and they've got the run game to try and ball control the game here a little bit. But you give this stadium hope, and it could turn into, maybe the toughest environment that they've played in all year.
I think it probably is going to be the toughest environment, Wisconsin is not the size stadium as Michigan Stadium, but you talk to people in the Big Ten and they think this is one of the louder stadiums. And I know people who came back from Michigan kind of mixed reviews on, there were a lot of people, maybe the sound didn't play as much of a role as they thought it might. This is going to be a silent snap count game. You're going to have to work on their cadence. That's something they haven't had to do a whole lot this year. They didn't have any issues at Michigan. Do they have issues here? Do they have issues, frankly, with a makeshift offensive line, right? I mean, it's not like they're missing 5 guys, but a different right guard. Are there problems there? How does Poncho handle everything? I feel really good about all of these things considering what we've seen so far this year, but it's another game just to have that kind of in the back of your head of, this is a first-year starter at center, going to be in, I think, the toughest environment he's been in all year. They've got a guy next to him, whether it's Saiuli or Rogers, who hasn't had a lot of experience and certainly doesn't have experience in these kind of environments. How do they kind of stack up? I think the answer is going to be really pretty positive, but I think you at least have to kind of toss that out there, because you're right, Matt. This has a reputation for being a really tough place to play, and a really tough place to play, especially in night games. And that's what Oregon's walking into here.
We should also note that, Poncho hasn't been the greatest at snapping lately.
But there's been some tough ones.
Last week
none of them have gone over the head, but Gabriel's had to jump and go over here and go over there to grab balls. It's not been good.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into our predictions for this weekend's game. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. We've got an updated standings. I still am in first place with a 56, 42, and 2. We had another tie.
This killed me, Matt. This killed me.
Jared, Erik is second, 53, 46, and 1. Jared's 50, 49, and 1. So everyone's still right there. Big week can put you in first. But the second tie of the year came with Evan Stewart, the over-under of being set at 55. And what are the odds that he hit exactly 55?
This is why you do decimals, Erik. If it was 55.5, my under would have hit, and I would have looked really smart. Instead, everybody gets to look smart. So there you go.
I don't think we all look smart. It was all just right on the nose. So, all right. Yeah. Jared starts us off with his team prop bets.
Oh, yeah. First one, I went with rushing total yards for Oregon of 185.5. This would be the second highest that the Badgers have allowed this season. Alabama rushed for 181. And like I mentioned earlier, Iowa ran for 329 on 54 attempts. So I went under here. I originally had this at 200, and I was like, oh, that's too high. But I still went under here. I think that this is plausible of a potential possibility here, but I don't think that they'll go over to 186 to 200 yards.
The uncertainty with Jordan James kind of was weighing on me a little bit as I was making this. So I also went under. And again, we talked about it on our Wednesday show with Jordan of he could play the full game and have 100% workload and look great, or he could be uninvolved in the offense, or he could play one half. I just don't know really what the expectation should be. So with that kind of uncertainty, with such an integral part of the run game, I'm going under.
I am going under as well, 185.5, but I am expecting Jordan James to play, and I am expecting Jordan James to have a big game. I just don't think there's going to be the Dylan Gabriel running impact, or Noah Whittington's not going to go for 70 yards on the ground as well. So I went under.
All right, next one. Over under 177.5 passing yards for Braden Locke. I decided on 177.5 because it sounded good. I didn't really have another real good logic behind it, other than the fact that he's thrown for under 200 yards in over half of the games this year.
Yes.
All 5 of them. The most he's thrown was Purdue, where they won 52-6, 361 yards through the air, but that's very clearly the outlier. It's 121 more yards than what he's thrown for. So I went over here. There's a chance that if Oregon can force them into 3rd and 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, whatever it is, 3rd and long, that this number could be lower. Like, I thought that it might have been lower at Michigan. Colston Loveland said otherwise. It's a first-round tight end right there. Wisconsin does not have a first-round tight end, or really a first-round talent at receiver this week. So I went over here, but it wouldn't shock me if it hit the under.
Your methodology, or whatever it was for your number here, is really good. Because this is a tough line. I wanted to go under, but I think Wisconsin is going to be chasing for this game, and that will lead to them getting right around this number. I don't know if they'll necessarily even hit 200, but I did take the over. I think they'll maybe finish in the 180s, 190 range.
Yeah, I think, like what Erik said, Wisconsin's going to be chasing all day. I anticipate Oregon to get a sizable lead, and then you factor in a first down success in it defensively, and it's probably going to force Wisconsin into some throwing situations. So I took the over.
All right, last one for me. 6.5 penalties over under for Oregon. This has been the talk of the town recently because of their penalties against Maryland. Again, like I said earlier on the podcast, Wisconsin will not be throwing the ball as often. And so I don't think that the defensive backs will be put in these precarious situations. I also think that this is just what Dan Lanning's teams do. Like Erik said earlier, I believe in the podcast, that when they have problems, they go and pretty much fix them up the week after or a week or two after. So I went under here. It's going to be a tough environment with in Camp Randall with the crowd noise and everything like that, but I still have them under 6.5 penalties.
I took the over of just maybe there's a little bit of a lingering effect here. The numbers will suggest that the under is the play, though. If you look at, this is something I don't know if we had on the podcast in the past, but the 5 previous games before this, 5 penalties, 4 penalties, 3 penalties, 3 penalties, 2 penalties. So this is a team that had been handling its business before a huge outlier game against Maryland, but I, for some reason, decided to take the over.
I'm also taking the under here. I just think Lanning and company will make last weekend the outlier, and it won't happen again. So, all right, offensive prop bets. Those were mine. Over under Jordan James 99.5 yards rushing. I picked this number because the first couple weeks of the season, it was always like right around 100 yards or more for Jordan James. In the first 6 games, he had 4 that went over 100, and he had a 95 that almost made it in the opener. And then since Ohio State, he's only hit 100 yards once. That was at Michigan 2 weeks ago. Now, the injury here impacts things a little bit and probably skews some decisions here. I'm banking on James playing. I think this is a game where they need him for the full length. He will play the full length, and he will hit the over.
I went under here. I think Jordan James will play as well, but I don't think that he'll play as many snaps as we're kind of used to. We haven't gotten like the real clarification from Dan that he's fine and it's okay, like that he's practicing full speed, all that other stuff. So I think he'll play. I don't think he'll play his normal workload. I think we'll see a lot of Noah Whittington, who has looked pretty darn good in the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to say under for the Jordan James total.
Yeah, it's a tough one because like if he didn't just sit the entire second half basically against Maryland, I'd probably smash the over here because this Wisconsin run defense isn't anything to write home about, and Oregon, when they've been in charge of these games, have just kind of pounded it with Jordan James in the second half, and he's gotten some pretty large numbers, as Matt alluded to early in the season. But I don't know if they're going to want to pound the rock with him in the second half. This could be a thing where if they do get to a certain margin, maybe they just kind of go back to what I think this might be a little bit of, which is load managing him, of like, okay, he's going to play the first half, but if we've got control in the second, why put him out there? So I took the under with kind of that a little bit of uncertainty about what his status is or how much they're going to want to use him.
Okay, the next one, over under Oregon 5.5 plays of 20 or more yards. And this one, Wisconsin averages just over 3 allowed. Oregon averages right on 5. So it's basically, do you think Oregon exceeds their average or not? I think with the defensive struggles to run the game or to stop the run for Wisconsin, that's probably going to attach or bring up a couple guys to the box and create some one-on-one situations. And even without Tez Johnson and his kind of one-on-one playmaking abilities, I think Oregon's going to break off 6 or more. So I'm taking the over.
I have the over as well. I think 20 yards can be easily accomplished for this team from a variety of players. It can be just a run of 20 yards. It can be 20 yards through the air. It can be 40 yards through the air. I think there's a load of possibilities for Oregon to get 20 yards. This kind of reminds me of the prop bet we had for Michigan 2 weeks ago, where it was like over under 3.5 of 30 plus yards. And then Trayshawn Holden had all of them. He just beat the record by himself. So I don't think somebody will beat this number by themselves, but again, I think there's a ton of opportunity for Oregon this week. So I'm going over.
You guys both went over, so I went under.
As you should, to be clear.
Just playing the odds. No, I, as Matt said earlier, I mean, the Oregon averages exactly 5 per game, and so it's not unreasonable to think they have 5 again, and this doesn't hit. So I took the under. I think it's, as you guys alluded to, though, very plausible they could get 6, 7, or 8 over 20, but I'll say they hit 5 exactly, so I can catch up in the standings over you guys.
Last one, over under Wisconsin's defense allowing a season high 469.5 yards of total offense to Oregon. The 469 came against Southern California on the road, a game in which in the first half it looked like they were in complete control, and then the speed of USC on the perimeter just kind of broke the game open, and Wisconsin just couldn't match score for score. They gave up 419 to a Penn State offense that I just feel like is slow and old school and not really creative. And then 2 weeks ago against Iowa, a team that runs the ball just obsessively, 422. Alabama went for 407 in week 3 of this season. But I guess the point here for me is like Oregon has better offenses than Iowa, Penn State, and USC by a wide margin. And if they're already flirting with 469 against those teams, I've got confidence that Oregon will put up 469, 470 or more. I didn't want to do 500 because that's a lot, but it just feels like this is a game where offensively Oregon could do, feels like they have a potential to do whatever they want.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me. I ultimately decided on the under here. Oregon averages 457 yards per game, so it wouldn't surprise me if they got 13 more yards here to hit the over. I just think this could be Oregon runs up the score, but has a really good first half. Goes into halftime up 21-7, 21-10, and as they've done all season, not really score in the third and maybe tack on another touchdown in the fourth and make it a nice 17-point victory as they leave. So I'm kind of banking on that they're going to do what they've done all season, which is pretty fair, but I'm going to go with the under here.
I'm not sure the pass yards are going to be, and maybe I'm just overthinking it because of the Maryland game, and the 183 yards there just stuck in my head, and I need to exclude that and remove that from my memory. But that was the most recent game, and it's the only other game without Tez. And unless the pass offense surpasses 250 yards in this game, I don't think 470 feels, that all that attainable. So with mind, I took the under. All right, defensive prop bets now.
Yep.
All right, I have 1.5 interceptions by Oregon's defense. I thought this would be an interesting one considering Braden Locke has thrown a pick in, I think, all but one of his starts and multiple in a couple of them. Certainly not the most accurate passer Oregon has faced this year, but I did take the under. I think they'll have an interception. I don't know if they'll get 2.
2 is a tough number. So I went with the under as well. I, again, wouldn't be surprised if it happens, but to predict 2 is tough. So I'm going under here.
I had the same thing as Jared's philosophy. Like I won't be surprised if he throws 3. Like you. But 2 is a hard number to go. I feel real confident 1 will happen, but I'm hard to pick 2, so I went under.
All right, 3.5 Wisconsin drives of 60 or more yards. I was trying to find ways to kind of like measure the sort of consistency we'd see from Wisconsin's offense. And so I thought 60-plus yard drive, kind of that means that's a sustained scoring drive most of the time. Do they have more? Do they have 4 or more is basically the number here. And I took the under. I really think Oregon's defense has some positive matchups here. And unless I'm totally underestimating what Wisconsin's offensive line is able to do, because I do think at tackle this is about as good as Oregon's going to play all year with Nelson and Mullman. Unless they just run it down Oregon's throat in a way I haven't seen and don't expect to see from this defense all year, I just don't see them having that kind of sustained success. So I took the under.
I went with the under here as well. I went back to last week against Maryland to see how those guys did. They had 1 drive of over 60 yards. Everything else, 56, 50, 59. It's their first touchdown drive that went 70 yards. And so in order to, really to score or to have multiple drives of over 60 yards, those really have to be touchdown drives, or else you're kicking a field goal from the Oregon 15-yard line. And that's totally plausible. Like that could definitely happen with Wisconsin, but that you don't win games by kicking field goals. So I went the under here. I think it's going to be a potentially long day at the office for Wisconsin, but they are coming off a bye, so we'll see.
I looked at this as to get 60 yards or more on a drive. Like Jared said, they're going to need to score touchdowns. And to do that, they're probably going to need to rip off multiple explosion plays. I just don't see Wisconsin going the length of the football field, getting 4, 5, 6, 4, 7 yards per play. And it just be a methodical drive all the way down the field. I don't think they're going to get a bunch of explosion plays. So I think that limits their chances for 60-yard drives. So I'm taking the under.
All right, last one, over under 1.5 tackles for loss for Derek Harmon. This feels like a game where there is some opportunity for him, unlike last week where, Maryland barely ran the football. They got the ball out really quick. It was hard for him to get involved there. I know the one time he was in the backfield, or one of the few times he grabbed a face mask. Wisconsin and the way they're going to run it and potentially the high volume provides the runway for him to get 2 or more tackles for loss, but I did take the under.
I took the over. I think Derek Harmon is a beast, and I think that's as much philosophy as I need for this conversation.
I also took the over, and I think I saw Derek Harmon, I saw the stat, and the first thing that came to mind was the first play of the game against Michigan, where he shot right through the offensive line. I think, like Jared said, he's a beast. He will be close to being basically unblockable against Wisconsin. So I'm taking the over as well.
And to be clear, I still think he's a beast, even though he took the under. Just to be clear.
Sure.
Maybe not.
If we told Derek that, I don't think he'd be too thrilled.
No.
He's a very serious man, and sometimes he's very angry. As we can see, that would be fun to watch.
I by the way, I really enjoy interviewing him. He is as direct as I've seen for an Oregon football player. He just tells you like it is, and I respect it.
All right, score predictions. I kind of settled on a number and then realized for the third straight week that would be the margin of victory, 21 points. So I'm going Oregon 35, Wisconsin 14 in this one. It just goes back to my comment about speed. I think Oregon has the clear advantage there. I think they've got the better players at basically every position. They will have the better player. They've got the better depth. I think Dan Lanning's coaching staff is better. The concerns are just going to be, sometimes teams play above their weight. And when they play above their weight and they do it at home, which is like a place like Camp Randall, that could maybe lead to the game being closer for maybe a longer stretch than it should be. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. I think in the third quarter, ironically enough, Oregon's going to kind of pull away and kind of put this game on ice. But I like Oregon's ability to create explosion plays, prevent them, dominate, run defensively, and then basically it's just going to be a shortened game because of the style of play by Wisconsin. but 35-14, 21-point win for Oregon.
I've got Oregon 33-17, moving to 11-0. I think, what's been kind of at the forefront of my mind this weekend, we've talked about it outside of these shows, but throughout Big Ten play, is the caliber of quarterbacks Oregon's going against. I mean, I think about, in the Pac-12 and even this year against Ohio State, like the teams that really give Oregon fits or beat Oregon ultimately are the teams that have really high-end quarterback play. And that's not what they're walking into with Braden Locke. And that doesn't need to be a huge slight against him, but he was a backup quarterback to start the season for a reason. And I just don't look at the opposing sideline and think this is the guy who, if Oregon comes and even brings like its B or B plus game, is going to be able to guide that offense down the field with enough consistency to score enough points to win. And I find it hard to believe Wisconsin's going to hold Oregon below 30 points. And I find it hard to believe, frankly, Wisconsin's going to be able to score more than 17, 21, 24 points, somewhere in that range. So maybe it's closer than 16 points. Maybe Oregon doesn't cover. That would necessarily surprise me, but I would be surprised, I think, if this game is really, really close late, because I just don't see the offensive firepower there from Wisconsin unless the run game just explodes and it's a really disappointing day for Oregon's rush defense. I just don't think they have the horses to keep up.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I have Oregon winning 34-20. I have it a little closer than you guys. I think it'll just be a little bit closer. I'm not sure if that's like recency bias from how Oregon played against Maryland or just the penalties and coming off a bye for Wisconsin. I do think that really helps a team when they're coming off a bye and Oregon's playing their 8th straight game. But I just think that this could be a 14-point win. It could be a 21-point win. It could be a 28-point win. This all comes down to just, can Oregon shut down the running game for Wisconsin? And if they can do that, if they can hold them to, under 4 yards a carry and make life really difficult for every running back that Wisconsin tries to use, like, this will be a really tough game for the Badgers to move the ball down the field. And if they have to go through the air, if it's 3rd and longs, like I've said before, like, this is a severe advantage for Oregon's defense. And they will give up. There will be 3rd down conversions that are 3rd and long. It's like a 3rd and 9 or something like that. You just have to live with it because, do it again. Just, here you go. That's fine. Good job. Good throw. Whatever. Do it again. Let's see if you can do it for a continued drive, because we're going to stop the run. We're going to force you to throw the ball, and eventually you're going to mess up. I think that's just going to be Oregon's defensive philosophy going into the game. And offensively, I think the team speed for Oregon is going to be too much for the Badgers. And we've seen that before. It didn't happen as much last week with Maryland. I think the brand of football that Maryland has played and does play now is very different than a lot of the Big Ten. They are the ACC constituent of the Big Ten, where a lot of their players are Southern grown rather than, corn-fed out in the Midwest. And that's with all due respect, because there's some big boys like the Wisconsin offensive line. But I think it's just going to be closer to what it was against Illinois, against Purdue, a little bit against Michigan, even though those are some really good athletes up there. I think the team speed is going to be on full effect, maybe just from the very jump. And that's kind of how it has been with Oregon and Wisconsin in years past that they've played. I don't expect it to be much different. So I have a 14-point victory for Oregon. Like I said earlier, it could be as up to 28 if they decide to score in the 3rd quarter.
Bonus prop bet, and I have absolutely zero data to provide context to this.
Perfect.
TV broadcast, how many thumbs down instances do we see from Oregon? Because this has kind of become like the underarching storyline now, or a storyline of this team, is the gladiator thumbs down thing, as they've just basically references of it the last 2 weeks.
So, like, what's the line?
How many times has the TV broadcast shown an Oregon player?
I'll say more than it could be 10 or 12. I mean, they're doing that a lot. It could be a lot more than that. I mean, it could be in one camera shot, 10 or 12 guys doing it. Frankly, I mean,
I'm gonna go 12. 12 times.
I mean,
are we counting?
I don't know.
Who's supposed? I'm staying home, so should I be counting?
Yeah, Jared, don't write any stories or cover the game. Just track how many thumbs down.
It's fine. It's great. I don't know. It could be a trillion. I was trying to really quickly think, like, is there another like early 2000s, 1990s film that had like a very obvious hand motion that they could start doing? Because Dan likes to switch it up every week.
He does.
So it could be something from something else. Maybe they bring out like I don't know. Maybe they bring out a dance from some movie. I don't know.
Yeah. I do think this is going to be a thing we keep saying though. I just think it's built in now. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. It's probably going to be a lot more than we think, because I think when they score a touchdown or have a big defensive play, I think they're just going to keep doing it. And if everybody's doing it, it's going to be a lot of guys. So
NFL guys are now doing it.
Oh.
It's turned into a thing now. So, all right. That's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Next time you hear from us, it'll be late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, breaking down this Oregon at Wisconsin football game. For full coverage, go to duckterritory.com. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.